You. Greetings, fellow Watford fans. Omar here, and it's time for the Orns 10-minute take on Watford 0, Hull 0 today at the Vic. Watford did not get this game right at all. Their approach was not an approach that you needed to use for Hull City, a team in the bottom four who had been poor this season, but had some pretty good away performances. They had won at least 3 games on the road this season, and after 3 weeks away from Championship football, Watford, we were told, were ready to start this game. We're ready for this game. But that was not true, judging from what we saw for the 95 minutes we watched. A horrendous game to watch in damp, dank, cold, wet conditions at the Vic. A game in which the fans had nothing to shout about because the players had nothing to seemingly care about on the pitch. Watford approached this game as if they expected to win it. They thought that the magical moment would come, that they would just win the game before the 95 minutes were up. Well, no such fantastical feat was in the offing today, because Watford did not bring the business approach that I had called for in the Orns Saturday focus yesterday. And I said that Watford had to approach this game with all business as their mindset, as opposed to all expectation as their mindset. They actually did choose the latter option, the wrong option. They expected to win this game rather than take care of business. Take care of business. Because if you want to win a game, you have to be about it. You have to handle your business. Watford did not do that today at all. They expected that somewhere late in the game, they expected that somewhere in the dying moments of injury time, they would somehow find that goal. It would just happen. But that is not how you play football. That is not how you approach football. And you do not approach football with the expectation that you're going to win the game. You have to put in the work. Remember in maths when you were told, show your work, show your work, show us how you approached and got through that long division equation? Well, Watford did not show their work on the pitch today against Hull City. And you ended up with a 0-0 draw. And this is a game that Watford should have won. Should have won. Not because Raymond I missed a sitter near the end of the game, and not because there were other opportunities for Watford that weren't cashed in on. This is a game that Watford's approach needed to be better in from the very start. This is one of the things I said yesterday at the Orns Saturday Focus, which is that Watford had to start from the very off in this game with the mindset and mentality of being about business. But Watford was slow. They were cautious. They moved the ball very slowly for much of the first half, didn't get up the pitch quickly enough, reverted to backwards passing. A number of balls didn't get to their intended targets. And even so, you wouldn't believe that the passing accuracy was 81% after half time. That's incredible. At the half, rather, it was 81%. And that's very, very strange to me. The halftime statistics did tell another tale. They didn't have a single successful dribble in the entire first half. They didn't attempt one. That gives you an idea of how poor Watford were on the day today. And this was a game that Watford threw away because they expected to win it rather than put in the business attitude that they had to put in to win the game. You have to handle business, and you have to handle business at home. That's the first thing you do. Handle your affairs at home. But Watford didn't do that today. They allowed a Hull City side to frustrate them. And that was the whole game plan. I also said this yesterday on the On Saturday Focus. Hull were going to come in and try to frustrate Watford. Hull and all these other teams this season have Watford and have a target on Watford's back. And Hull tried. They weren't particularly great today, but at least they showed some spirit and they dealt with these conditions better than the Watford players did. And Watford are the team at home here. There can be no excuse. You can't say that the cold weather was a factor. The fans can say that for themselves because they shivered in their seats for 95 minutes watching this dross. The players have no excuse because they're moving up and down a pitch for 95 minutes. So you can't be telling me that the cold temperatures had an impact on this game. This is England. England gets cold at this time of year. That is not a surprise or a shock to anybody. And those Watford players have played in this kind of weather before, not just this season, but in previous seasons. Espria this season has played in weather that's been cold. It's not an excuse. I don't care what excuse you're going to tell me about the weather. That had no reason and no bearing on this game in terms of Watford's performance. Watford have given this kind of performance when it's been hot, when it's been cold, when it's been warm, when it's been lukewarm. Nothing to do with the temperature. The temperature has got nothing to do with the game and the way it was played. Nothing. Hull were out there. How come Hull gave themselves a good shot of winning the match? If it wasn't for a couple of blocks by Christian Cabaselli, they would have won this game, Hull. They played in the same conditions Watford did. And Watford are playing at home. I want to repeat that. Watford are playing at home. There's no excuse for this kind of performance. They gave this performance against Bristol City 3 weeks ago, and they went to warm weather Spain to get their training in and bond and do these things, and it had no impact on today. None. They played the same way today that they played 3 weeks ago before the World Cup break against Bristol City. And then that was a terribly dreary 0-0 draw as well. The performance was the exact same thing. Dreck, dross, drivel. There's no difference in these two performances. So what was the 3 weeks about for Watford? 2 injuries. That was a big factor as well for Watford. The injuries, the performance and the injuries. Because Hamza Chowdhury was injured in as early as the 4th minute. He wears number 4 on his back. And that was the minute in which he got injured in, the 4th minute of the game. And goodness knows how long he's going to be out for. But clearly couldn't continue. I don't know why the sub wasn't made earlier. He was on the pitch for another 5 or 6 minutes after he got hurt, limping around. That would not have helped him. So I think Slaven Bilic got it a bit wrong today as well, with the way he substituted and the times in which he substituted. I didn't understand that today. Bio coming on very late in the game. Why didn't he come on earlier when you were chasing the game? Well, not chasing it. You were chasing a result, a positive result. And the other injury coming right near the end of the game, Raymond I. 4 months out because he was injured, had a surgery on his hamstring that he ruptured against Queen's Park Rangers back in late August. That Watford lost that game. And then Manai gets injured again, same hamstring, I believe. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Another hamstring injury. He'd been on the pitch for 5 minutes. By the way, a bit more than 5 minutes. By the way, he did not acquit himself very well today. Anyhow, missed a sitter near the end of the game that should have given Watford all 3 points. But this was not the game for Watford. Watford just didn't seem as if they really wanted to play this game. They just hoped that because they had the better players and the better quality, that all of a sudden that alone would give them the 3 points. It never does in football. Never, ever does and never, ever will. You have to actually make an effort. Watford players were straying offside. You had João Pedro barking at Watford players late on because he had 3 or 4 or 5 of them offside, and you're trying to get a winner. That shows you the attitude was dire today from these Watford players. The only Watford players who really seemed to care and put in a decent enough effort was João Pedro, Tom Deli Bashiru, and also I will give credit to Jeremy Ngaki. I thought he did pretty well. And Espria has some good moments as well. But really, those players are the only players that really gave you something and cared about the Watford cause today. Very disappointing performance from Watford. But again, it's what we've come to expect from this team, especially against lower level, pardon me, Hull, but I have to say, lower level opposition, only in the sense of the table, because the table showed before the start of play today, Hull were in the bottom 4 or 5. They're in the bottom 4 or thereabouts in the championship. Watford were in 6th before the game kicked off today. So that's what I mean by lower level opposition in terms of the table standings and what the table says. But in terms of the game itself, Hull were basically in 4th place today ahead of the 5th place Watford, based on their approach to the game, based on the way they set up, based on their inventiveness. They looked like they cared a bit more. They tried different things. They weren't able to break through Watford, but they were able to at least give Watford's defense something to think about. Hull weren't great, but they gave a performance. At least they tried. But from a Watford perspective, we were terrible today. At home, again, to a team in the bottom 4 or 5, a team that, look, they sacked their manager the same month we did. A team that doesn't have the quality players that we have. No excuse. But quality alone, just having quality players, does not guarantee you 3 points in this league, in any league. And so it was incumbent upon Watford today to give a performance that the fans could look back and say, you know what, tough game, but we got the win and we gritted it out. Watford didn't do that. They didn't give the Watford fans anything to be singing and cheering about. Watford fans were booing. I heard the boos, the impatience at Vicarage Road. Watford have reverted back to that kind of team they were last season, with this performance at least. This was the opportunity. A win would have got Watford to 3rd place. Instead, they had to settle for a 0-0 draw, and they settled for it all right. Perhaps they were still on the plane in Spain, and the rain fell mainly on Vicarage Road today. And so did the cold, damp, dank atmosphere of this game, where players just did not apply themselves. Watford players specifically did not apply themselves in this game. Beyond me as to why that happened, but that is what happened today. This was the game that Watford needed to get 3 points from, and they have to avoid doing what they constantly do against teams in this level of the championship, is play down to the level of their competition. And that's what Watford did today, but it was the whole game plan that ensured that. Every team's going to come into Vicarage Road and try to frustrate Watford and try to perform a smash and grab on Watford. Teams have studied Watford very closely this season and last season, and that is the way you frustrate Watford, is to be constantly playing high-line football against them, smothering the midfield, packing the midfield, and then over committing on on Watford players down the flank, and closing up those spaces and getting men behind the ball. That's what Hull did today. Hull performed pretty well in that way. They weren't great, but they did the fundamentals of football that you needed to get out of Vicarage Road with a point. And Watford did not do any of the fundamentals that would have got them all 3 points. And as a result, Watford slumped again in a game where they should have got 3 points from. This game and the Bristol City game before the World Cup break are symptomatic of where Watford are in their mentality and their headspace. Incredibly enough, that's the 3rd consecutive clean sheet that Watford have kept, however. And at least that's one thing you can look at with some degree of positivity. But aside from that, Watford today disgraced themselves in front of their home fans. This has been the Orns 10-minute take.